Normally when you connect the interface, you'll end up with a single flashing power light, and then you'll be looking for the solid USB later on once everything's connected. But when you first connect, sometimes you can end up with this red status light, and I find this happens when I change from one car to another. So I'm assuming it has something to do with some particulars about the car that gets fed to the interface, that it needs to be right to make everything connect. This, however, will connect okay. What it will do is it'll load some new firmware into this once we connect the diagnostics later on. So we'll have a look at that. So I've connected the interface. I've got the flashing green light for the power, and the status is red at the moment, meaning that it needs to load new firmware into it. I don't need to turn the ignition on or anything like that. The key isn't in the car at the moment, so all I'm going to do is just start it. And then once I come up here and go to diagnostics, and I've got it in development mode at the moment, but this is just to show you what's going to happen when it needs to put in new firmware into the interface, because I've used it on another car. So there you can see it's downloading the new firmware. It'll try to reconnect. Sometimes it doesn't. It'll open up. You can have a look at the interface. I've got a solid green light on the USB at the moment. The red light has gone away. So hopefully this should connect okay. Sometimes it doesn't, and it'll ask you whether or not you want to start in simulator mode. And if that's the case, you just come down to this button here, which is F8, and all you're going to do is say attempt another connection, and then that normally just picks it up straight away. But that's connected perfectly okay. If you're changing between development and the normal after sales mode, so we're going to go into the settings to change that, I would suggest when you do that you wait about 10 seconds after you exit the program prior to opening it up. I find that sometimes it takes a little while for just to get itself sorted prior to everything working okay. So I'm now in development mode. I'm just going to exit out of that. And once I'm in here, just wait a few bananas, maybe 10 seconds or so. And then I'll go into settings to change the program mode. And I find this bit here, changing the settings, isn't a big deal. It's after I change the settings to the new mode that I want to just wait a little bit. So let's just change this back to after sales mode, save that, exit. Now just wait about 10 seconds or so. I've got a single green power flashing LED on the interface, which is exactly what we're after. And now I've waited a few bananas. Now I can just go back into diagnostics, and hopefully it should connect okay. I've got a solid USB green LED, so that's connected perfectly okay. And once you're at this position here where the diagnostics program is going and everything's connected okay, now I need to go and turn on the ignition, because if I don't turn on the ignition, it's not going to, I mean, some of the control units will be working, like the gateway and a little bit of, because The power that the car is getting is just terminal 30, which is direct from the battery, but it's not getting terminal 15 through the ignition. So a lot of the control unit functionality hasn't been turned on. So you might be able to do a few things with some of the control units, but for the most part, you won't be able to do much at all. So this is where you'll need to turn the ignition on. And with the ignition turned on, now I can go into any of these control units and do whatever we like. Some control units, for example, the transmission and the DME, so for the engine, you can't have the engine going to delete code. So for example, you might have some problem where you've had the engine running, you've been testing some stuff and you're trying to delete codes, and then when you go to the DME or the transmission, it won't let you delete those specifically. Others you can delete whilst the engine is going. But if you are struggling with that, so you need to turn the ignition off, always go back to this page first. So before you shut the engine down and turn the ignition off, come back to this page here, then go and turn the ignition off, turn it back on again, and then, for example, you could go back in here to the DME or the transmission, open that up and delete those codes. What you don't want to have is either of these open when you are turning ignition off, because sometimes that can spit the dummy a little bit. Just make sure you come back here first. In a number of the control units under programming, there are some what they call customer specific settings that you can set up. A lot of them there's just nothing in there. So for example, for the engine and the transmission control, there's nothing that you can change, but there's some interesting stuff that you can change that might make things a little bit more convenient for you. Before I show you anything here, just be aware that some of this might be illegal to do in your country, so make sure you know your own laws. And I'm absolutely not advocating you do anything that is contrary to your nation's laws. But for example, if I go into the instrument cluster, just go to coding adaptations, go to customer specific settings, and next. So once you get into the customer specific settings, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can change, and it's pretty simple. I don't have tire pressure monitoring on this car, so all of the values for these items here are set to 0, but you could go in there and change the pressure settings, I guess, for all of those. And it looks like you can change when it changes over from winter to summer as well, which is interesting. Things that might be of interest to people. I mean, I've lived in the Middle East before, and at 120 kilometres an hour, you get a constant gonging if you're above 120 kilometres an hour. So if you wanted to turn that off, I guess you could go ahead and do that. But for me, I don't want the belt warning. I'm always going to wear my seatbelt. But occasionally when, for example, I stop my car at my post box and I've got a bit of a drive to the house, I won't put the seatbelt on when I drive slowly, but it's going to constantly gong, and the only way to turn that off is to either put the seatbelt on or to turn the car off completely. So even when you're stopped and put it in park, it'll still be gonging at you, which drives me a bit mad. So if I wanted to turn that off, I could come down here. There are two of them. There's the acoustic and also the optical belt warning. Click next. Current states are active and on. So inactive and off. I write that. And now that won't pop up for us, which is great. These are the customer specific settings for the air conditioning. And interestingly, the only options got available to you are those for the center console buttons. So the ones that select Sport, Sports Plus, your sports exhaust, etc. Now the 5 left buttons and the 5 right buttons aren't interchangeable, meaning you can't put a left button on the right hand side, but all the left ones can be swapped amongst each other. So let's pull up the 5 here, and you'll see that button 1 is selected as Sport, button 2 is Sport Plus, and button 3 is the PSM or ESC off. You would expect to see button 4 would have PASM if you've got that assigned, but you can change these to whatever you want. So for example, if you don't want people to be able to select Sports Plus, if you just do this, just not assign that and then write it, that Sports Plus button won't work. Something that worries me because I don't use Sports Plus in my car, but I use Sport all the time, and what I'm afraid of doing is just hitting Sports Plus accidentally when I'm bouncing around in the car, and suddenly the thing just revs to the red line, which is not something I'm interested in doing. Some people love doing that, but for me, I'm not. So that may be an option you might be interested in, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of what you can do with this. Certainly, this is where you would go if you are doing a Sports Plus aftermarket fit to your car. This is how you're going to go in and reassign these buttons. The front BCM gives you some options that you can change. So the options we've got here is acoustic feedback for locking, window comfort opening, and roof system comfort opening. Now, I don't have the roof on this car at the moment because I'm just mucking around with it, but I went and had a play with my other car that I drive every day to see what all these options did. Even though this top one here says only permitted in North America, what it does is it just gives you 2 chirps when you lock the car. So if you, for example, when you have the hood open or something like that and you lock the car, it'll just give you a single chirp as a warning. It's just 2 of those. So it just goes chirp, chirp, and the side lights will flash. Without that on, you don't get any chirping at all. That's easily changed. The window comfort opening, and I'll open these up and have a look at them. The window comfort opening and the roof system comfort opening. The default for both of these cars was, actually this one was on yes. However, when I played with my car, the comfort system opening, which is where I use the key, so if I am locking the car and I continue to hold it, or I press it a second time and hold it to lock on the key fob, it will close the roof and it will wind the windows up. When I open it, it will roll the windows down a bit, open the roof completely, and then roll the windows back up. If I turn on the window comfort opening, the roof won't work when you use the key fob. So the window comfort opening takes precedence. So if I turn this one here to yes, so if I saw both of these as yes, it's actually the window comfort opening that takes precedence. So what that will mean is if I press and hold the opening, so the unlock button on the key fob, it will just wind the windows all the way down. And when I lock the car, it will wind the windows all the way up. Which is a bit of a shame. I was hoping that you would be able to open the roof and wind the windows all the way down when you're unlocking, but it doesn't want to do that, which is a bit of a pain. And it seems as though that if you have both these to yes, then the window comfort opening takes precedence and the roof system doesn't. But also what I found was even if I had both of these to no, the roof system comfort opening still works. So maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that for the default for some countries is it's always going to be on, and for some countries that you need to select it like this. Don't know, but that's what's going on there. In the driver's and passenger's seats, it's interesting that there are some funny things in here, because this car that I'm working on here is a 2014. The car that I drive every day is a 2013, but it was built April 2012, so it was one of the very early production run cars, and these options aren't available to me for the seats. Now this car that I'm working on here has manual seats, whereas the car that I drive every day, the earlier model one, has the 14-way and memory seats. But interestingly, all these options weren't available. It just had 2 options, or 1 option for each of the passenger and driver seats, and that was to restrict the amount that it could move. Whereas this seems to be able to, and maybe it's just a software change that happened later on, you seem to be able to change the comfort entry and exit adjustment travel. So for those who might not be aware, with the memory seats, when you open the doors, it'll just roll them back slightly so you can get in a bit more easily, and as soon as you put the key in the ignition, it rolls it forward again. It seems as though in this you have the option of going in and changing to how much everything actually changes. So you can see those first ones there were just for the driver's seat. So you can change how much it moves aft, down, the seat back, etc., etc. Now these are all like unchangeable because this doesn't have the memory electric seats, so it just gives me nothing at all. But I suspect that if my other car was a later model car, I would be able to adjust those for both the passenger and also the driver's seat, so they move to a different position when you open it. And that might help for someone who is, wants to see a little bit higher when they first get in, and then has it roll on down the moment they put the key in the ignition, just due to bad backs or whatever it is. But that looks like it gives you a little bit more adjustment with that. And interestingly, in my car that I drive every day, the earlier model one, the comfort entry doesn't work with the passenger, whereas it looks like for this, I have the option of changing it on the passenger side as well. Interesting. Something that might be worth playing with if that interests you.